So I've been talking with a lot of friends about the idea of online culture, and that when you think about the future, we think about everything going online, everything, probably half or more of what we do in our lives these days we do online, in terms of communicating with people. If you're an author or an artist or filmmaker or musician, or if you do any kind of contribution to culture in general, you're probably doing a lot of it or most of it online. And so the question then becomes, what is culture when it's totally separated from the space that you inhabit? What is it when you remove it from the sense of the place? You know, China has a culture that evolved, gradually over their history in Asia, and all of our various different, Native American tribes and things like that, our prehistoric life, everything was centered around where we actually physically existed. My question is it even possible to have a culture in a totally disembodied online society? We're animals, and we're wired for this physical interaction, and our ability to communicate and stuff like that. We've gone through several evolutionary phases in which we're becoming better and better at communicating, and then just become more of an ability to choose who you want to interact with. It used to not be even something that you would have a choice in. You would be born into a family or a tribe of people. Of course, your mother and your siblings were the main people you'd interact with. You wouldn't even encounter another tribe for a lot of your life. Our ancient history and our prehistoric history, and our even up until a couple hundred years ago, was all very local. We interact with people who we know all of our lives, and even as recently as 150 years ago or so, if you lived out in the countryside in England, it might take a 50-mile journey to London, let's say, and you'd have to do it on foot or drawn by an animal in some way, and still, 50 miles on a horse is, get pretty saddle sore with that kind of thing, or in a carriage or cart or whatever wheeled vehicle, you're bumping around on. And it might take a couple days, So people didn't really interact with the world very much. And, now with this virus thing, you have the entire world infected at the same time, because we have air travel, and people are traveling from continent to continent thousands of times a day. And so, get it one place in the world, and boom, everybody has it everywhere. And, all the major cities are shut down. It's beautiful outside. We can, hang out in and around our houses, and, stay away from people enough to, not pass it around as much. But back in the day, the way we're wired is even the next village was foreign territory, and our history is a very bloody one, where the next village was potentially enemies. And still today, you have tribal societies, you still have cannibalism, and people go attack a neighboring tribe and, eat the better, what seems like it would be a better tasting individual. So that still goes on. And even in Europe, the Dark Ages were a very bloody time, and, a warlord culture that has existed for millennia. We think of it as something that, it's long gone, and wherever it pops up, it can be easily put down by civilized countries and stuff like that. But that's when there's mayhem, and when our kind of more sophisticated societies, we try to put that down as much as possible, because it produce chaos in a society where you're relying on the subtle interaction of people that aren't fighting and that aren't blatantly killing each other. But I mean, in the old days, up until modern society, past few hundred years, we had these wars all the time, and the wars were not, we think of wars now, there's this, great calculation of resources, and, it's strategic because of a global three-dimensional chess thing that's happening. But in reality, war is just malice, just malicious intent, You look at the wars that happened all throughout Europe in the Middle Ages. Most of the time they wouldn't even, conquer the territory. They just would have a war to destroy the territory. They would kill and rape and pillage all the villagers and burn everything down to the ground and then leave. Take off, maybe, make off with some of the women and, maybe some animals and stuff. But in general, it wasn't really an economic strategy. It was only purely the emotional, malicious intent, for revenge, or people who have been born into some kind of nobility and having some sort of narcissistic need to self-aggrandize and do better than their brother, do better than their father, do better than the neighboring warlord. It was purely a personal interaction of based on intrinsic emotional impulses. The intention only to do harm. In medieval times, there was little of value that could be looted. What would you take? A couple of hammers and axes and chairs, maybe some jewelry. Which even jewelry back then, there was no, sort of well-known market of prices and value of things. It would just be, I got this special cross from this church, and it was me who got it, and then gradually someone else overtakes them, and all those treasures change hands in those kind of situations. Of all the foot soldiers and everyone else that joined in, they joined in for the sake of rape and pillage. That was what war was for. It wasn't nation building. Later, in more modern times, the higher ups took a few steps back and thought, we could use this to gain territory, to enact political policies. This is from around the Renaissance. Commerce started taking over, and they realized that you can't sell anything to people if you already killed them. So where is your tribe in this modern society? Nations, international unions, trade alliances, they're all, artificially created superstructures. And they don't have like a neurological anchor. Our educational system and our academic tradition is one of overcoming your emotional impulses to think rationally and reason out structures of how a society ought to run. So we're no longer connected because of blood relations, nativity. We move around, you could be immigrants, half the world is immigrants. And then in terms of culture, what was an intrinsic culture of tribes and family and those kinds of things that we associate with culture. We think of the cuisine of the French and Italian art and the dukedoms of the Renaissance, and we think of ancient Greece and ancient China, and that evolved as part of a location, as a locus, where people, because of their proximity to each other, they form these deeper and deeper ties. And that's what we usually think of when we think of culture. But nowadays, what is the culture? We don't have these ties. We have culture that's imposed from above, from massive cultural institutions, you might call them, or commerce. The ability to create stories and to seize the imaginations of the population with elaborate fantasies shown on films, and the Avengers and Star Wars. The biggest export of the United States is that culture. But I think of that not as a shared culture, but as a parallel culture, because we are all we all, there might be 10 people from all over the world that have never met each other. They all might know the whole Avengers lineage because they've all seen the movies, or they've all watched Friends. I've come across a few people these days that speak this perfect American English who've never been either to England or the States. So how do you know? And, oh, we all watch Friends, So, but it can't be a shared culture because I didn't watch Friends with this person from Eastern Europe or from Southeast Asia. They watched it based on their culture. I mean, we have, like lyrics in a song. You have, people know the words, but it means something different to every person. Even if you go to a concert, if, some of the big names, if you go to a massive concert of like Kanye West or Jay-Z or Madonna or whatever, you're all fans, but once you get to talking to people, you might realize you have totally different views on everything, and it's only because this mass media has bombarded the world with these universal myths that are really kind of in one direction. You don't have a lot of everybody joining into the music making or the movie making and all that. Maybe eventually over time, some people might bubble up and become part of that infrastructure or superstructure, however you want to think of it. So, to approach culture the way that you would approach, tribal societies or more primitive European history, pre-Renaissance, or pre-literate even, it's a very different thing. And, with all this, what always surprises people is when the kind of older wiring pops to the surface, where suddenly you have racism, where the instinct of the neighboring tribe being foreigners, that is a kind of an instinct that, in the old tribal world, it's self-preservation. Humans are hunters, and potentially, we were living by killing other beasts, and humans are just as much another beast, and an arrow can be turned on a human as much as it could be a buffalo. So it's a big challenge as culture becomes more elaborate, more online, more disembodied, but yet more sophisticated, for people to bend their hereditary wiring to something that is more all-encompassing, where you have to look at your neighbors as potential allies, and the whole planet of 7.5 billion people as potential allies or potential disasters, because both is possible. We have nuclear weapons that are ticking away in the ground, these missiles that are trained on each other for, 75 years now. And that's part of what the possibilities may hold. And, we have to be vigilant in keeping that down. So a lot of it is keeping down some of these primitive impulses and institutions that exist from more primitive parts of our own even recent history, like the whole nuclear thing. We went headlong into how can we make a bomb that can blow up an entire city, because we're in the thick of a war. But now that that cat is out of the bag, it's like, oh my God, can that toothpaste be put back in the tube? No, it can't. So we're scrambling culturally to figure out how to deal with that one issue, the issue of huge populations traveling back and forth, a more globalized economy where you do a few things online here and then you get paid from someone halfway across the world, and it all happens digitally. The issue of what is your tribe? What is your home? What does it mean to have a home when most experiences are accessible from everywhere? The world is all sort of wired by the internet now. So you could be in Delhi or Prague or whatever, and check your email and watch some YouTube, watch some Netflix. It's all available to you. You can call an Uber in Rome or Paris. I don't know about Rome, but I know you can in Paris. The underpinnings of the society have been kind of depersonalized and institutionalized, and you could say mechanized and digitized. So where does that leave the human individual? The human individual's emotional states and needs are far beyond what can be just being tapped into this international system that gives everyone a certain level of participation, but it's not the same kind of experience. I guess that's the battery limit there. So the questions that I have for everybody about this situation that we all find ourselves in, and that is pretty much going to be our future for quite some time. What is home when most experiences are accessible from everywhere? I've always thought of myself as a movie maker, and I've always been interested and obsessed and mesmerized by movies. But what does a movie mean in this kind of a world where everyone is wired with a camera? It's sort of what is not a movie. People have YouTube channels, people share, watching movies of each other all the time on their phones. So what is a movie anyway? In the streaming world, we're all involved in a gigantic group movie. If you consider all the YouTube channels and all the cable and streaming services and FaceTime, we have the phenomenon now where visually you can create something that's a perpetual, ongoing interaction with somebody visually through your phone. So then that calls the question: what is the value of creative work then? A lot of what would get to the point of someone who was a creative person, like an artist or a musician or something like that, it would take half a lifetime of hard labor to get to the point where you could express something to that degree. So how creative work is valued is something that is changing. It used to be that these were rare individuals that got to the point where they could make a painting or a symphony or write a novel or something like that, because most people didn't have the resources. And then when you had it, and you finished it, it was an isolated artifact that you would then, after the advent of publishing, you could create copies of and distribute to people, or hold performances where you would bring crowds in to see something that could only be witnessed in person. They even had this for paintings. People would go, there'd be an announcement of a painting by a famous artist in the 19th century, and then admission was charged to see this painting, and then prints were made of the painting to be able to distribute it. But that was then. This is now. You can look at an artist's entire life work entirely online for free. So what is the value of creative work? What is sexy? What is sexy anymore? You have the visual aspect of porn becoming this huge cultural sinkhole of energy. You hear between 25 and 35% of all internet activity being some version of porn or webcamming or stuff like that. Obviously that's one of the major impulses that we have is sexual curiosity, and of course that's going to be one of the main subjects. But that sensitizes you to again a digital, disembodied, intellectualized, commodified experience of sexuality. So if we're continuing this trajectory, what is going to be, I've read in a couple of places that male fertility in the West has gone down precipitously just in the past 10-15 years, and some people are speculating that porn might have something to do with it. But at the same time, our curiosities are are being fulfilled. People understand and know a lot more about what people do, and we've become more sophisticated because of it. Obviously, there's crass commercialism, contributing to the dialogue, as such as it is. But then you have, people, especially people who have been marginalized because of taboos about their preferences and their, like gender and LGBTQ people, stuff like that. Is people are. It's become understood that all of these things are very common and normal, and that the range of what we think of as okay sexually is now rightly understood to be not a threat, and that everybody has their own particular flavor of how they want to do things. So then these questions apply to everything about the old view of the world. What is literature? Is a long text interaction qualify as literature? Well, why not? We have, some of these great authors are famous for their letters. You have these characters like Flaubert and Franklin and Jefferson, and back then letter writing was a high form of literature, and there are emails and of course tweets and things like that. I mean, here we have a president who has used this very janky form of text messaging to like seize the dialogue of an entire nation, and he's allowed to. I don't understand why. I mean, if I was Jack Dorsey, I would just pull the lever. Nope, sorry, can't do that. And if he has to go under, fine. We give all these billionaires the benefit of the doubt for having, kind of discovered these things. But is it a good thing that, someone has that someone can take, 18th century laws of democracy and apply a new technique to go to the jugular of information control and lead a dialogue that way just because the new pipeline lets you do that? There's ethical decisions that need to be made, and we don't have the qualified people to make those decisions. The people that come up with the technology are young and brash and curious and discover things, and they're not evil necessarily, but just like discovering the atomic bomb, it can be done, and how you use it, you won't have any control over. So, the way Facebook and Google and Amazon and Twitter and these have totally reshaped the society, and we have a society that has not bridged the gap. So I'm hoping that we can come up with some sort of form of dialogue where that can be effective within the political system and within the cultural system to incorporate these changes and somehow tie it into what is our visceral heritage of sense of belonging to a society.